In the legends of ancient Greece, the centaur was a virile animal with the head and trunk of a man and the body of a horse. In this modern age, the horse becomes a steed of steel, and the man its rider, though he still seems a part of it in harmony with all its moods and actions. Those who keep an eye on sporting news will need no reminder that British motorcycles have proved themselves supreme again and again in important events at home and abroad, though now the foreigner is beginning to fight back hard.
This is a new Daytona from Triumph, one of Britain's few remaining representatives in the world of motorbikes. The name Daytona recalls almost forgotten racetrack glories of a dominant British past, and the foreigner did fight back hard, harder even than our triumphal narrator could have imagined. By the 1970s, the British industry stood in ruins. The Japanese, German and Italian competitors had disappeared over the horizon, leaving the British to wonder how they'd managed to lose it all so quickly. When these pictures were taken in the Rover factory in 1913, it was the French who were passing on the crown of world leader in automotive technology, and it was Britain who stood in wait. It was mainly in the Midlands of England that this victory was won, casting crankcases as seen here, where Rover were pioneers, and mastering the art of the internal combustion engine was a wholly different challenge from their traditional crafts of pottery, mining and heavy industry, but ones at which they proved themselves supremely adept. Once assembled, the bikes were tested full throttle on the as yet untarmacked and dusty roads. Roads that, with only a drop of rain, could soon become quagmires. Fine for a horse and cart, but more difficult for a motorbike. The date, 1913, when this film was shot, is significant. It was 1 year before the outbreak of the First World War, after which the relationship between man and machine would change irrevocably. The demobbed troops in Britain, France and the USA, with money in their pockets, sought in peace the machines they'd become so familiar with in the first mechanized war. The veil of mystery had been lifted from the combustion engine, and starting at around £70 new, it was the motorbike that was within most people's price range. This is the Forces event at Brooklands, the legendary but long-dead banked circuit in Surrey, southern England. The bike of choice for amateur competition was the Rudge Multi, with its sophisticated 20-gear system. The romantic associations that went along with these dangerous machines and the daredevil status that the riders acquired didn't go unrecognized either. Public roads such as these had scarcely improved from before the war, but lent themselves to races such as this, the London to Land's End Marathon. Without restriction and with little protection, these competitors hacked across the countryside, instituting in their wake disciplines such as hill climbing, trialing, and road racing. In the USA, the competition was as fierce, and it also drew huge crowds to watch as riders attempted perpendicular hillsides on their massive but simplistic V-twins. These bikes, after all, evolved out of the need to cope with the rough terrain and colossal distances that Europeans were mostly strangers to. During the 1920s and 30s, it seemed that the whole world was becoming intoxicated with the thrill of speed, and nowhere was this more true than in Britain. Flight Lieutenant Stainforth of the Royal Air Force captured the Schneider Trophy for Britain, thereby becoming the fastest man in the skies, whilst Malcolm Campbell in Bluebird set new world records for the fastest man over land. On two wheels, the undisputed Speed King was also British.
Here is Joe Wright, wearing his streamlined crash helmet and going out on his big supercharged machine on Southport sands in an endeavor to recapture the motorcycle maximum speed record, held by the German champion Ernst Henner. But Joe's engine wasn't happy, and the best he could manage was only 136 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour below the German record. We say only 136, but that isn't exactly a crawl, is it?
This is another record-breaking machine. In the early 30s, Great Britain always was within holding the world record. This is Joe Wright's 1930 1000cc supercharged Excelsior. He didn't actually break the world record on this machine. He took it to the Tot Autobahn in Hungary. Can you imagine getting yourself from the UK to Hungary in 1930 with your gear and equipment? He only did one good run at 163 miles an hour, which is way above the world record, but on the way back it melted the back piston, and he ran out of time and the weather was against him. Joe Wright was a great world record breaker for the UK and held the record for many, many years. Japs made many V-twins pre-war. They made the 500 V-twin, the 680, and this is the 1000. As you say, two cylinders, 500cc each. And this one has got the supercharger mounted on the front here. The supercharger really boosted up the performance of the bike. And the early record breakers, they ran on very, very special fuels, supercharged. So it really was the business. Thus, they did 163 miles an hour one way.
These glory days were never to be repeated for either Jap or Excelsior. The former became an early victim of the worldwide depression of the 1930s, whilst the latter mark gradually faded away, giving up the ghost in 1965. The motorbike was liberating the ordinary individual as well. With cars still outside most people's budgets and most businesses, it had to perform any number of tasks. And perhaps without knowing it, it was performing an important social role too. It freed women from being dependent on men for when and how far they could travel, and it could reach places that the train could never hope to. The British landscape was being opened up and explored, and there were very few corners of it that didn't yield to the inquisitive bike. There were attempts to compete with the burgeoning popularity of the bike. This is the invention of one Professor Zachka of Berlin, a tubular steel and canvas car that the professor claimed could be assembled in 4 minutes. In the USA, bike makers were chasing their tails trying to compete with the phenomenon of the Model T Ford budget motoring for the masses. If ever the many bike makers who went to the wall had dreams they wished could be fulfilled, they must have looked something like this. Back in Europe, if ever there was an event that required someone to watch over you, it was here on the Isle of Man. Tourist Trophy's reputation for carnage remains unequalled, with many riders refusing to compete, calling it simply too dangerous. In this period between the wars, there were plenty of other races, of course. The Siston Park Grand Prix, was Brooklands too.
I'd have you know that Brooklands is not only for the strong, silent thing, far from it. So here we have much sterner stuff, riding real he-men's 100-mile-an-hour machines. Oh, girls, truly a thrilling spectacle.
And Donington Park. On the continent, they raced through public parks in Hanover, Germany. In Holland, there was the Dutch TT. And Northern Ireland held the fastest event in Europe, the Ulster TT. But the most exacting event, the most dangerous, the anvil upon which so many reputations were crushed, and the glorious stage upon which so many, such as Norton, were made, was here on the Isle of Man. The 37-mile course includes mountains, towns and villages, and the rider has only a flimsy helmet between him and oblivion, constituted by the dry stone walls that line so much of the route.
This one here is probably the last works Norton they made. Horizontal engine. It never actually was raced because the factory closed before they had it completely finalized. They did run the engine on the test bed, and it was very successful, but the idea of running the engine in this position was to get the weight center of gravity very, very low so that you could handle the machine a lot better. This one here is the world-famous featherbed Norton. Featherbed because the thing handled very, very smoothly, and this was the bike for every private owner to race, and this is the 350 edition. The featherbed frame went away from the old concept of pressings and lugs and castings and so forth. The McCandless brothers and Otte Bell in Belfast perfected stiff bronze welding so they could butt weld tubes to headstocks and so forth. That was the first fundamental step forward. Also, the design of the frame was very much more stress factored, much more thought put into where the stresses were, how it was going to handle, where it was going to be distorted under load. They worked at it for quite a long time. There was many, many prototypes, and they ended up with this, and really this was the bike of the 60s.
Some of Norton's designs bordered on the outright bizarre.
This is the Norton Kneeler, which was a new concept which Norton, Otte Bell and McCandless brothers, which they really built this in Belfast where I was born. I remember when I was a small boy hearing the stories about this fantastic machine. Ray Am, the rider for Norton's, he raced it the first event in the Northwest 200. I was a little boy watching by the side of the road, and this wonderful thing came past. Can you imagine in 1953 this appearing way ahead of its time? It broke the lap record, but he had fuel pump problems and retired about the 5th lap, but it showed its real potential. Later he took it to the TT, but because of its kneeler, that rider actually kneels in it, the ACU banned the thing from racing in the TT, although he did practice on it. They then took it to France, went for world records, and at Monterey they broke 33 world records for Norton in 350 and 500 class. The speeds are in the album relevant to the bike, and as you'll see the speeds, it did 120 mile an hour for 7 hours, which was even in today is a good performance. So it had the potential, another great British engineering project that unfortunately never was fulfilled to its best, what the potential was.
Racing pedigree has helped this company survive its many problems after the halcyon days had finished.
There's no doubt whatsoever in the whole of the mind of Norton and its management team, both here and at group level, that the Norton name is a very evocative name, and I can't think of another name that evokes such passion in the motorcycle industry. I think that passion is born of a number of factors. First of all, the heritage of the name, and we always like to use the term for Norton, the legend with a future. Even to this day, we get people that purchase the old Manx Nortons coming into the factory here, to come and talk to us, to tell us what they've done, where they've been, how they've toured. Inevitably, we get people coming in before the TT, and inevitably, we get people coming in after the TT.
For the ordinary person, their sport was a long way from the rarefied and intoxicating atmosphere of the TT circuit. Hundreds of clubs had sprung up around the country by the 1920s in order that men and women could indulge their fantasies of speed. Athletes? Perhaps not, but they were the very embodiment of the British amateur. For some people, though, trialling had a more serious intent. Sammy Miller was, and still is, one of those who built a reputation on achieving excellence in the sport, and through it helped develop what we understand today as the modern motorbike.
I joined Ariel's in '57 with the very, very standard 500 HT5 Ariel, and with my road racing experience started to work and develop it. And after a number of years, it became the world's most successful trials bike. You probably noticed how it grips and how the engine is so strong at the bottom. It's not a revving engine, it's a very, very strong engine. It pulls right down to nothing, and you can, with throttle control, you can almost leave the clutch alone and it'll really pull. It was an ideal opportunity for the manufacturers to also manufacture this for trials riding and trail riding, so people could really have a comfortable, low-speed ride without a lot of revs, the way all the Japanese bikes do today. It's quite light for its size. Although it looks a big bike, it is still quite light, and it handles very, very well indeed. Suspension at the front end, a lot of travel, back end. It's got a 4-speed gearbox, which is a bit of a handicap these days, but we have a lot of interest in pre-65. That's when I left the British industry and went to Spain, that's where they got the pre-65 events from. And we still have a very, very, what's the strongest branch of the trial sport in the UK is what we call the British scene, the pre-65 scene, and we get entries of 200 and 300. Talmag that I won this year had 300 on entries, and they're turning people away. The manufacturers always had competition departments for road racing, scrambles, trials riding, because they got great feedback to their production department. If there was a problem, we would find it out in long, long events. Road racing, you got your stresses and strains, so that find all the weak points. Suspension and trials, obviously you can see you want suspension, so we specialised, perfected the suspension, front and rear. We specialised the oiling system, so we got plenty of circulation of oil, and generally improving the bike week after week, whereas ordinary road testers, they just tested stuff, but never give it the stress and strain that was necessary to find out if it was weak or not.
By the 1930s, motorbikes were cheaper to buy than ever. The Great Depression had meant a price-cutting war between the manufacturers who'd survived it. Sport flourished, though. It seemed impervious to recession. The Scottish 6-day trial became a classic reliability and endurance event. In Germany, the motorbike found strange employment. In Italy, there was the Dolomite trial over the evil Stelvio Pass. In America, it was hell for leather, in both senses.
What's these two as they round the corner? Cutting in? Now he's cut out. Play the game, you kids.
In Britain, there was the carefree enjoyment of a Sunday afternoon spent marshalling an amateur club race where everyone knew everyone else, and the sport was an excuse to share a beer afterwards. There was grass track racing undertaken with little more than a sturdily knitted waistcoat and a fob watch to protect you. All this would soon be only a memory as the bikes were put away and the men who rode them left their homes behind to use machinery far more brutal.
Well, the Second World War was peculiar. One, it was a different war, of course, to the First World War, inasmuch that the fear of bombing was very evident, and the fact that the company had now converted at least 60% of its manufacturing capability to manufacturing small arms for the British forces. And consequently, in the 1940, when the bombing started, although motorcycles continued to be made at something like 350 a week, this was, of course, very small quantities compared to the normal manufacturing quantities that were in existence before the war. And of course bicycles were still being made, but again and everything was turned over, the majority of the factory, and of course the dispersal units, and during that period we were employing something like 40,000 people during the Second World War. Not all at Small Heath, of course. Small Heath still manufactured the motorcycle, and all the areas were blacked out, but it was basically the M20 or the M21, and the lighter motorcycles, there were still a few 250s, C11s and C12s, being manufactured for water corporations, policemen, postmen and that sort of thing, but they were very, very small quantities indeed. And if you look at the registrations of two-wheeled vehicles, motorcycles that took place during those war years, you will find that in actual fact the registration and the number of motorcycles dropped dramatically during those years. We were beginning in the early period of the war to see changes in the materials that we could use for various gun parts. And this in turn obviously had a great civilian application, and the net result was that because we were already manufacturing or starting to manufacture design items that would be to the new materials, we had some advantage.
By the 1950s, BSA had become the world's largest manufacturer of motorbikes. Its confidence was obvious to see.
By tradition, the first Saturday in July is BSA Sports Day. By tradition, too, the weather is usually fine. On the spacious sports ground adjoining the factory, thousands of employees, their families and friends gather for a typical British sports day. The 100 yards, the 220, the mile, cycle racing, and of course, the sideshows. Sports days come once a year, but the work of producing motorcycles is an everyday job. It starts in the smithy, where generations of smiths, blacksmiths, have worked heating metal and hammering it into shape. Today, using drop hammers that can be controlled to deliver a blow of several tons, or one as light as a feather.
Their ambition did not stop at the road.
We'll go by air. Destination Holland for the International Motocross. So fasten your safety belts, there'll be plenty of bumps ahead. It's all eyes on the finishing line in spite of this non-stop downpour. Winner of the Dutch International Motocross, Jeff Smith of Great Britain. How about a toast to the winner? Okay, here's mud in your eye, Jeff. Many cargoes come to the busy ports of the Isle of Man. But this is the month of June, the month of the world-famous tourist trophy races. And down at the docks, the accent is on anything connected with fast motorcycling. Let's move up now to the starting area, where the riders are warming up for the Clubman's trophy races. Ever since these races were started, they have given enthusiastic sporting motorcyclists a chance of competing over the renowned Isle of Man circuit on machines that are basically of standard design. The riders, of course, are amateurs, men who make high speed their hobby. These events will be run over 4 laps of the full 37-mile international course. That means that every part of these machines, every skill of the rider, is going to be put to the acid test of sustained high speed on the most punishing circuit of its kind.
These were the two BSAs that really led BSA's campaign of sales throughout the world. I'm on the 650 Rocket Gold Star, which is really the business. You know, everybody who had a Rocket Gold Star really thought they were the cat's whiskers. This one here is the 500cc Gold Star, which was very, very popular for clubman racers that won the Clubman's TT many, many years. Very, very fast bike, and the ideal bike for anybody starting road racing. It was well priced, not as quick as a Norton, but quick enough for most runners. They also made it 350cc, but this one is one of the original 500s.
Over the mountain section to the 34th milestone at Kate's Cottage. Then comes the half-mile drop to the right-hander at Craignabar with Hilberry Corner ahead. Hold it, hold it. There's number 34, Phil Palmer. Grab your stopwatch. This is going to be a really close finish. Phil Palmer tails full bore towards the finishing straight. There's seconds in it, only seconds. The result comes through. Winner Phil Palmer, BSA Gold Star, average speed 81.83 miles an hour. Second, Desmond Wright, BSA, with a record lap of 83.05. Third, Jim Davey, BSA, 81.66. Fourth, A. Bowie, BSA, 81.56. Here's one for the winner. It's a good one, and brother, he deserves it.
Back at the factory, it was a less glamorous bike that was ensuring the company's financial stability.
Many thousands of BSA motorcycles are in use in public service all over the world. In Britain, smart post office messenger boys deliver telegrams by red enameled Bantams. Lucky lads. Probably there are more Bantams running about all over the world than any other motorcycle.
It came in reparation from Germany. It was a copy of a German motorcycle engine that was very successful. And it started as the 125 and started as a rigid frame. And this was in 46, 47. The first ones were announced. I think it was £88, if I remember, something of that nature. And we started those, and we started using, for the first time, female operators assembling the Bantam motorcycles at that stage.
But BSA weren't the only ones enjoying success in the post-war years. Hughie Hancock's, then an apprentice with Triumph at its Meriden plant, remembers what it was like to be a part of that company.
It was wonderful. As a young man, starting out at Meriden, it was the ultimate. You couldn't wish to work anywhere better. It was so nice, you couldn't wait to get up and go to work in the morning. If you were interested in motorcycles, there was no better place in the world to work than Meriden. And it gave you a real buzz, it really did, to know that you were part of this thing. And everybody was friendly. There was a wonderful atmosphere. If you walked down into the main production areas, it was so bright. The smell, the oil, the petrol, the smell of the new paint, the tyres, the rubber. And the people were always laughing, they were always shouting.
The destinies of BSA and Triumph were intertwined, of course. In 1951, BSA had bought Triumph for £2.5 million. But guarding the latter's interests in this turbulent marriage was the legendary designer Edward Turner.
Edward Turner was, I've always likened him to captain of a big ship. He held awesome power, he really did. He was a martinet, he was somewhat of a bully. He knew what was going on, he knew what he wanted. People couldn't easily sway him from his beliefs. I think that the factory ran a lot better under the auspices of Mr. Turner than it did later on when he wasn't there.
His designs were responsible for so much of Triumph's success. The Tiger 100 and 110, the Trophy and the Thunderbird. but there were flaws inherent in the union of these two great companies, and Edward Turner would retire bitter, angry, defeated.
In 1951, Jack Sangster sold for $2.5 million the Triumph motorcycles to the BSA grouping, done the small arms, obviously. And there was a interchange then with Sangster joining the Small Heath parent board, and a look-see, but it was certainly not in those early years. They were both left basically to carry on making under their own mark, under their own arrangements.
I think we were okay. Triumph were okay in the early years, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, up until I went in the army. There wasn't too much interference from BSA because they'd got good sales themselves. Like I say, when I came out of the army in 59, we had there was a distinct difference. There was a different feeling in the factory, and I can't put my finger on it really, except to say that things had become strained. There was the old, the happiness had gone. And I think in 59 we started to feel the influence of BSA. We started to feel yes, influence, that's about the right word. The decisions that Triumph were making, I don't think were being made by them alone anymore.
It wasn't until Sturgeon came in 1964, and there was a complete change of outlook, that there was an effort made then over the next several years to in actual fact join forces. And instead of doing it at either Triumph or Small Heath, someone dreamed up Umberslade, or Slumberglade as it was then known to a lot of the people within the works areas.
We had this place called Umberslade Hall, which was out in the sticks, and it was supposed to be a big design centre. We used to call it Mighty Marmalade Hall. And some of the things that came from there we didn't agree with. We found that there was a lot of Triumph chaps that had been in the job for many, many years, some since before the war. Old managers that knew the job inside out, and they'd got understudies with them who reasonably expected to take over when the manager retired. But come the 60s, that wasn't to be. The understudy was sort of shunted sideways, and in came some bright young spark from the university who was a graduate, and he was a BSA chap. And not only didn't he know the job as well as he should have done, but he was having to ask the chap that he'd deposed how to do the job. And I think a lot of animosity sprang up from that.
Regrettably, of course, it was staffed not necessarily with motorcyclists or people in the motorcycle industry. People from the aero industry and all sorts of areas came along, and there were all sorts of ideas generated that were not those that certainly Edward Turner and Bert Hopwood in particular would agree with, and I would agree with them at the particular time as well. And a lot of money was obviously spent, but a lot of animosity crept in because of this. And when you say Small Heath, you see, Small Heath had a huge press shop. Small Heath at one time made its own chains. Small Heath made its own dual seats. Small Heath had tube manipulation, made all its own exhaust system. Small Heath had a forging department. Small Heath at one time had its own piston castings and had some aluminium casting. Made its own pistons, as did Triumph. And where you compare the two companies, there was a tremendous amount more bought-in items at Meriden than there was at Small Heath. There was more manufactured pro-rata. And of course there was more variety at Small Heath in the types of machines, and of course guns were still being made, industrial engines were still being made, contract work for Doughty Motors and other things. So there was a bigger spread of. But in particular, the question of getting together on using even the same nuts and bolts. They bought their nuts and bolts, we bought our nuts and bolts. And it wasn't until the late 60s that an effort was made to standardise a lot of the smalls and eventually get round to commonisation, as happened when the triples were introduced. When we introduced the triple motorcycles in 1968, we were to make some Triumph, some BSA. And that, from an economics point of view, was about the biggest disaster I've ever seen from a manufacturing point of view. You had a complete new crankcase of 7 split parts to make for the Triumph one, because it was upright, and the BSA one was angled at 15 degrees. And you can imagine, to make 300 engines a week, half of them out of one grouping of castings, the economics of it was horrendous.
One bike, the Triumph Cub, seen here on hunting duty in the USA, has a history which amply points up the chaos of these years.
The Cub did very well. It was always a good seller. Super little bike. I had one from, I've still got one, over there. Rode it for many, many years, backwards and forwards to work. The problem that we had was that the Cub was such a good seller. And I think by the mid-60s, BSA were in trouble with the sales of their Bantam. The Bantam had reached the end of the line. It was what we used to call a stinky two-stroke. The Cub was a nice little four-stroke that had a good turn of speed, good fuel consumption, and it looked like a big bike. And obviously BSA now controlled us. So what they did to give the BSA chap something to do, basically they took the Cub away from Meriden. And they said, right, it can be built at BSA. Well, that was okay for the first 12 or 18 months. As is usual, if you machine something elsewhere, or you take an item off production and you take it somewhere else to be built, there's always going to be problems. And there were problems in 67, 68, hiccuping problems, because different people were building this engine that had been built at Meriden since 1954. When you're machining, there are certain little nuances, little things that you have to do, and obviously you can't pass all these things on to the guy that's going to do the job after you. It all comes with experience. But what happened then was the Bantam was phased out. They couldn't sell it. BSA couldn't sell the Bantam. The sales dropped right off. And in their infinite wisdom, they decided they were going to knock the Cub on the head, throw the cycle parts away, basically, and fit the Cub four-stroke engine into the Bantam frame and call it the Bantam Cub, which was a mishmash of two models, and quite honestly, it just didn't sell. It just didn't sell. It didn't look right. It looked horrible to start with. It wasn't a well-balanced little bike anymore. Oh, I know there are some riding about now, and some people swear by them, but it wasn't the Cub as we know it. And to a certain extent, it lost its identity, and I think that's why dealers really didn't want them. They didn't want them anymore.
During all this infighting and bickering that was tearing the British industry apart, the future king, having already sewn up the smaller utility market, was waiting to assume his crown in the larger arena.
Nobody had ever seen anything like it or heard anything like it. The noise. We used to have a radio in the workshop in June so that we could listen to the TT races. This is when the BBC used to put them out, regular broadcasts from the Isle of Man. And we were too used to hearing G50 matchlesses and Manx Nortons, the old singles, and then suddenly this ear-splitting yowl of a Honda 4 or a 6, and it was so different. And I think that's what turned the tide then. The kids wanted what they were watching Mike Hellwood ride. And they were little bikes. I remember going home on my 500 Tiger 100 going down the A45, and this little silver thing flew by me so fast and so quiet I couldn't believe it. It was a 250 Bentley or something. We went by and, oh, good God, what was that?
By the end of the 1960s, company bosses in Britain were searching desperately for excuses and in vain for solutions. Arrogance and complacency were high on the agenda, though. This is Eric Turner, no relation of Edward, head of the BSA Triumph Combine in 1969 on accusations of such.
Absolutely wrong, yes. Quite an ill-informed comment. We have known that the Japanese would be coming into the bigger market. They have, in fact, paid us the signal honour of trying to copy some of our machines. They copied our three-cylinder. They've got some of the machines that are on the market look very much like our own by appearance, so that I don't think that it's true to say that we've been caught on the hop.
Dennis Poor, Norton's chief, was of the same opinion.
Oh no, I think that would be entirely wrong. We've all known those in the industry for some time that these machines were on the stocks in Japan. We had some idea of the sort of form they were likely to take, but it should not have been a surprise to anybody that they came out at the time that they did.
I think the fact was that there were too many people at Triumph that thought we couldn't be touched, especially on the big bike side. I mean, once or twice we had Japanese bikes in for appraisal, and what was said was really fatalistic on one or two occasions. We remember particularly one of the bikes that came in was a Kawasaki, and after it had been test ridden, the words, I think Percy Tate's words were, "This is going to knock us for 6." And I don't think anyone believed him. I don't think anyone believed him. We thought we were impregnable. Of course, we were sending 95–96% of our total output to the North Americas. A bit like putting all your eggs in one basket, I suppose. You're okay until the handles come off the basket. That's it.
The Japanese had advantages, of course. A massive home market, import restrictions, huge government investment, and brand new machinery, a legacy of the Marshall Plan. The invention of the Mini didn't help the British market either, but what no one had guessed was that the Japanese were superb engineers as well. The British industry in its old form was finished. Simple consumer economics had dictated that, even though some were still unwilling to recognize the facts staring them in the face.
Anybody that comes in new is bound to nibble away a little bit. But as far as America is concerned, that in the season which has just ended, it has been affected by the very severe credit restrictions and high interest rates which have been imposed there, and to some extent a number of people, instead of buying the more expensive motorcycles, have perhaps been content with buying one which is a little bit cheaper.
The British lurched on from one failed enterprise to another. Norton, Triumph and BSA were eventually combined, disastrously. And it all ended like this. A grim rally at the Triumph factory, celebrating a magnificent past with the present already thrown away. Hughie Hancox remembers the final days.
When I walked out in 1973, the feeling wasn't good. The workers had occupied the factory, they'd barricaded themselves in, we couldn't get in. Service department, our obligation was to the customers under warranty that were in trouble, and there was a lot of customers in trouble in 73. But we couldn't continue with the service function, neither could the spares lads. They couldn't either. And I could see that basically it was all over. It was going to be a hell of an effort to continue working for Triumph. And we went over to Kitts Green to Macadam Lane, and I think I stuck it for about a fortnight, and in the end I said to John Nelson, look, I'm sorry, I've had it. I'm out of love. I've fallen out of love with the factory. I've got to knock it on the head. I've got to go. I can't live this way.
For others in the British industry, the rift had come earlier.
It was disappointing, really. I had worked with them for a long time and worked in the development department and the competition department. In '64, they were losing a lot of interest in competition, and I was approached by Senior Bulto of Bultaco to go to Spain, ride for them. So the press was full of, semi-manure going to Spain and all the rest of it. So I thought that I would at least get an appointment or an approach by the management to see if there's anything to be arranged, or did I want to stay, or what was my plans. That meeting never came. To the end, it came to Friday night. I loaded up my tools in the back of my transporter, disappeared out, and never had a thank you or cheerio or whatever from the Ariel company, which was rather disappointing. But when I went to Spain, it was the exact opposite. They welcomed me with open arms, and it was a very friendly, happy family, and we worked together, designed the trials bike in a very, very short space of time. And in the first year, they sold 5,000 bikes, which is probably more than Ariel sold the previous year, total production.
By the middle of the 1970s, after the government had refused to pump any more money into British motorcycling, BSA for one slid into a terminal recession. The name lives on, however, in a modest fashion in a picturesque corner of Gloucestershire.
Well, we aim at a market mainly aid-funded contracts in Africa, where the EEC or the World Bank or the Overseas Development Aid put up funds to supply a suitable vehicle for people working on health projects or food projects in Africa. And it is a condition of these contracts that they are supplied with a vehicle made in the area giving the aid, i.e. the EEC. So that's a particular niche that we are in. And we've supplied, on average, 500 to 600 bikes over the last 10 years per annum.
Sunlit sports days seem a very long time ago, although there is a curious symmetry.
We've become involved with the MZ company and have evolved an off-road bike with MZ for sale in Africa. And it's a happy reunion in a way, in that it was the Bantam engine which started life with MZ before the war and ended up at BSA as the biggest selling bike they ever had.
Nortons still exist, but also in much reduced circumstances. They've just released a new version of this bike, the Formula One Sport, a copy of the bike that won the TT for them in 1991 for the first time in 30 years.
Norton never ever will consider itself to be a high volume producer again. The old Commando motorcycle was in very high volume production relatively for the British industry. It's our intention to keep motorcycle production in the rate of between 1 and maybe 5,000 per annum over the next 5 years. And we will be aiming at high quality motorcycles for the discerning user, if I dare use the term niche market, where the guy that's got the disposable income is able to buy one of these machines, or the girl that wants to ride one of these machines will actually buy one. We will always endeavour to restore the credibility and the reputation of the Norton name in the future, in the high value, in the high performance, and in the high quality machine, rather than at the volume end of the market where the competitors have far too much sway as far as we're concerned.
The secretive new Triumph organisation at Hinckley is taking that high volume route, but can it possibly succeed?
I would say that, of course, they have a future. They have started off in the last several years with absolutely top-class manufacturing facilities. My only doubt would be that in the distant future that it will be necessary to keep revising both designs and engineering, and whether the finance that's already gone out onto that project will ever be recovered sufficiently to enable them to continually spending the sort of money that's necessary to get volume manufacture and design manufacture at a competitive rate in the world marketplace.
I'm a bit tunnel visioned, I'm afraid, with regard to Triumph. The logo that you see on this petrol tank is the one I'm in love with, not the new logo. As far as I'm concerned, Triumph died before 1973.